Hi, I'm Trina.
Luke.
We're here drinking some delicious Nitro beer. What do we have, Luke?
One of my favorite beers, actually, and actually a favorite for a day like today, which we'll make sure and show you a clip of -10 outside when we wear 7 jackets. This is Snow Camp Robust Porter. Close to my heart in that it's a simple, full-flavored, roasty, toasty, malty beer that has a nice, clean finish. And on Nitro, it's just inexplicably drinkable.
And smooth, yeah, I really like it. Cheers!
Cheers.
So, Nitro is what we're going to talk about a little bit today.
What's nice is, especially with our brands that are more consistent, the CO2 and the Nitro versions are pretty readily available. We try our best to get them out there in the market as much as possible.
Yeah, stay on the lookout for that big Nitro tap.
Exactly. As we move through seasons, we try to play with different brands. And so part of the fun with this is, while I'm sad that Snow Camp is going away, I'm very excited that Fire Captain is on its way.
Yeah!
Irish Red will be the next Nitro, and we'll be landing tomorrow with a Nitro tapping of Fire Captain.
I feel that maybe the stout or a porter, a darker beer, is sort of characteristic of Nitro, what people think of when they think of that Nitro. I think it can be really interesting to try some of different things, like that Irish Red on Nitro as well.
Yep.
In the past, we've done things like Snug, and I always personally really liked when we did a single hop session IPA on Nitro. It wasn't everyone's favorite, but the bitterness of the hops was super mellowed out by that Nitro and just made it refreshing and delicious. A different style of the gas that ends up in the beer. Most of our beers that we make here are carbonated in our bright tanks after fermentation. Instead of carbonating, it gets nitrogenated. If you've had cask aged ales, that was a more traditional style, is hand drawn. Nitro mimics that texture a little bit, but it is a different process and different style.
And with regards to the kind of gas blend, a typical beer is usually carbonated with what's called like beer gas sometimes, or just straight CO2. Kind of depends on the blend. Closer to like a 75 or 80% CO2, and then a small amount of nitrogen actually as well. When you make a Nitro beer, you actually flip that equation a little bit. What's interesting though is nitrogen actually doesn't go into solution like CO2 does. CO2 actually will go into solution. That's when you can see the nucleation, the bubbles coming up. That's CO2 that's in solution, right? Nitrogen actually doesn't really do that. Hence why when you get a pour of a nitrogen beer, you get that pretty cascade, because that's basically the nitrogen getting pushed through the faucet, pushed like into the soup, and and coming back up through and creating that nice pretty head and that creamy flavor. That's partly because of the way the faucet's designed, and that's very much with regards to how you're talking about the hand-drawn system. So back when they had these beer machines, they would suck beer through a cold box. That would make it cold, and as it came through, it was basically a pump that pushed it through a little sparkler in a faucet, and that would hopefully make a little bit of the carbonation pop up as it went into the vessel itself, but it would usually end up very similar flavor-wise to this. They were also naturally carbonating most of those beers. So they used the yeast to basically create that bubbliness that came out of it, and it was never perfect. So in order to replicate that, they designed something that was basically utilizing nitrogen as a similar gas base to create the flavor that came through in that, but not be a hand-drawn system or something to that effect.
And you mentioned the faucet also. There's a bunch of little holes in a Nitro faucet as opposed to like a regular faucet is just open with the CO2 pushing it through, but those holes help some of that sort of like instant bubbling. And
so we call it a sparkler. So if you look at the faucet, it's real long, and at the base of it, at that little tip, you can undo that, and inside there's this little perforated disc, and it creates a sparkling effect, is what they can kind of consider it. And actually, you can get different sizes of them depending on the type of gas that you're pushing.
And for us, at least, that's the reason why we just have our Nitros on draft. There are technologies, widgets, exactly, that will sort of mimic that effect too.
Yeah, it releases nitrogen, And there's also nitrogen dosing that a lot of the bottlers will use as well, and it's a very technical process from what I understand. I actually don't know it thoroughly because it's pretty proprietary. As it stands, our Nitros will always be
on draft. In terms of taste and difference, so we do have this beer in a lot of our Nitro beers. I think all of our Nitro beers, we make them with regularly carbonated and also on Nitro. So that can be really interesting to see sort of the difference between the flavors. For me, it definitely smooths out a lot of sharp edges of flavors. Obviously that creamy texture that you sort of mentioned are really characteristic of the Nitro style for me.
A lot of times if you do a side-by-side, you'll feel almost that you're having two different beers. Carbon dioxide actually creates an acrid flavor in some beers, and so it actually will hold together a lot of the volatile flavors that are within that brand, and that's
sort of bursts it in your mouth.
Exactly, and that's actually actually why you pour any beer with a decent head, because it's actually holding a lot of that flavor inside there. So CO2 does a lot of that work. When you use nitrogen, you're actually letting some of those volatiles blow off pretty easily, and so you still get plenty of the front end of the flavor and the tail end, meaning the kind of beginning taste and also the aftertaste, but that middle is not as complex because that CO2 isn't in there doing all that extra work. And hence probably why it's so drinkable as well, is that it's just, it can hit your palate and you can just swallow through and you don't feel that burn. It doesn't kind of create that same hurt back.
Come out to the tap room tomorrow, try some Fire Captain Irish Red on Nitro. You can even do a side-by-side as well.
Yep, it's gonna be good.
Cheers.
Cheers. Here we go.
But Nitro